Welcome back, Mando.
Oh, greetings, Bucketheads. Mavar Tagar. Welcome to our 361st rebel-rousing, rambling episode of MandoVision, and I am your host, Nargai Tom. Thank you so much for checking out this small independent Star Wars podcast. We are so glad that you're here. Please make sure you're following us on the socials at Mando_Vision on X and Insta, MandoVision at Blue Sky, and of course you can email me, MandoVisionTom@gmail.com. Make sure to like, subscribe, follow, and share the show with all the Mandalorians in your covert. All right, we are here for sort of a epilogue wrap-up show of our Rebels rewatch, and I'll explain the hows and the whys of that momentarily. But it's after doing what I did next, or last, I suppose, it felt appropriate to kind of revisit some things that maybe we didn't talk about enough or at all during the course of our Rebels rewatch. And so a couple things I wanted to get to, some thoughts I wanted to share, some things I wanted to get out there and put out for Buckethead Nation. And honestly, I'm looking for some feedback. I'm hoping you guys and gals and wonderful folks out there have some thoughts and have some opinions on what I'm going to bring up. And you can agree or disagree or tell me I'm a kook. It's all on the board for this one, because this will be perhaps the most nitpickiest of nitpick episodes that I've done in the past. But there are some things that I think we need to talk about, or at least that I want to talk about, and maybe, it's going to be kind of like a therapeutic in a sense. I'm going to bring up these topics. We're going to talk about some things. I'm going to get it out there in the open. I'm going to get it out of my brain, and maybe it'll be just good for my mental health overall. Okay, so I think with that being said, we might as well just dive into the episode. No need for the long preamble. Let's just go ahead and do it. You know what that means. It's time. Strap on your buckets. Let's go.
Get out of here. We'll hold them off.
You're going to have to relocate the covert.
This is the way.
This is the way.
All right, Bucketheads, we're back, and we're here to talk about things. We completed our epic rewatch of Star Wars Rebels, and as I said during those episodes, I loved rewatching Rebels. I loved going back and seeing the show with a new set of eyes as I kind of go back and dive into the episodes. I love the series when it first debuted, but going back now and seeing where we are in Star Wars, and going back and sort of recontextualizing a lot of elements of those stories was a lot of fun. And as I said at the time during the podcast as well, there were episodes where I just couldn't recall what happened at all. My memory was not as steel trap as it would have been in years prior. So going back and retouching on these episodes was fascinating and very, very enjoyable. Again, I don't necessarily want to rank the Star Wars animated shows, but Rebels is definitely near the top. It has to be, right? There's so much good stuff in there. But when Rebels ends, we are sort of left with a lot of questions. There's a lot of things that are left sort of vague and unanswered, and I found that to be somewhat challenging to process. We only know for sure. This is based off of Sabine's voiceover in the epilogue of the episode. We know that Hera and Zeb and Rex go off to fight the rebels, but we don't have a lot of clarity on exactly what Sabine is doing. We don't understand. Is she on Lothal the whole time? What's going on? And it's kept intentionally vague. And I had questions about that. And again, my first assumption was, well, okay, so from what we know from the Ahsoka show, they get together at a certain point after the liberation of Lothal. But what exactly is that timeline looking like? again, on the animated series, we sort of play with the time a little bit because the epilogue takes place. We see Lothal in the aftermath. It's stayed independent. It's thriving, and Sabine is there, and it sort of presents it as like she's been there kind of as the guardian of Lothal, waiting for Ezra's return when Ahsoka arrives and they go off to start their search for Ezra. Now, then we get into the Ahsoka series, which is really what I wanted to talk about, because after watching Rebels, I felt very compelled to rewatch the 8-episode season 1 of Ahsoka, which, as we all know, in hindsight, is essentially the sequel to Rebels in the first place. Yes, Ahsoka, it takes a more front and center role in the series, but it also, front and center in that series, is the questions that we don't have answers to. And things are alluded to, things are hinted at, things are suggested. And I guess this is just sort of me wishing that we lived in a day and age where Star Wars would just tell us. What's the big deal about telling us what has been going on in the time since we last saw these characters? Why the big mystery? Why can't we know what Ahsoka was up to when she left the world between worlds to when we see her arrive on Lothal? Why is that such a mystery? Why is that something that we can't have information about at this moment? And it's the same thing for Sabine. Her timeline is muddied at best. Again, we know that she goes off with Ahsoka, studies to be a Jedi at some point, a plot point of which I still have feelings on, and not the supportive kind. And I guess that's sort of the crux of this conversation is, and this is going to be very old man shouting at the sky, shouting at the clouds, get off my lawn kind of thing, because again, the period of time in which I grew up, when Star Wars was like, it was unknown if there would be more Star Wars in film, on TV, in any form moving forward, other than comic books and novels and things like that, and stories in the Insider. But they filled in the blanks. Those comics, those books, those stories, those video games filled in the blanks of the timeline that they were allowed to work within. The from Episode 4 to Return of the Jedi, A New Hope to Return of the Jedi, we filled in a lot of story. And then they gave us the sequel. They gave us sequel stories as well. But focusing for the purposes of this conversation, let's just focus on the fact that they filled in the blanks for a lot of characters in the time between episodes 4, 5, and 6. There was adventures that our characters went on. There was journeys they went on. There was emotional development that happened for all of them. And again, mostly impacting like more of the supporting characters. We know the big beats for Luke and Chewie and Leia and Lando and all those things. The adventures they have in between is great. But we knew their bookmarks, right? Because they're the main characters of our films. But again, we got to fill in those blanks between A New Hope and Empire and Jedi. And again, it was a different time. We didn't know there would be more Star Wars. So now that there is more Star Wars and we're creating more Star Wars, we seem to be reluctant to commit to any sort of background information or comic books or novels or whatever that could help fill in blanks, because we have to save all of those blanks for potential new animated shows or live action shows or movies or whatever. And I guess I am okay with that to an extent. But the intentional vagueness of it all, I find so very frustrating. Watching Ahsoka, and as you may recall from our initial reviews of that show when it came out, I had a lot of problems with the way the story was unfolding. I had a lot of problems with some pacing stuff and some of the decisions the characters were making, and those mostly held true on my rewatch. And while I do believe we will do a more organized, formal rewatch of that show heading into season 2 of it for the podcast, I have to say that, again, my frustrations stayed pretty true. I enjoyed the show more this time around, I think, but my challenges with it stayed. And those challenges are basically what this whole conversation stems around. Why is everything so intentionally vague? Why can't we know the things that we are all clamoring to know? Like, help us fill in the time. Like, you give us little pieces of information. Again, the shocking revelation, at least to me, that Ahsoka took on Sabine as a Jedi apprentice, as a Padawan learner. I mean, this is something I'm still reeling from. And then the decision of Ahsoka to stop that training after the Night of 1,000 Tears on Mandalore by believing that Sabine was now more motivated by revenge against the Empire, and so that she'd be training a potential future villain. It's all interesting stuff, and I hope it's something that we get to explore more fully in season 2 of Ahsoka, and perhaps it's why it's so intentionally vague. But the way the story unfolds in season 1 of Ahsoka doesn't give me a lot of hope for that, because there was a lot of stuff for a show that I felt was very padded out to fill in 8 episodes. They didn't have a lot of prime material to fill it out with. It was a lot of fluff and stuffing. You weren't giving us juicy details. You were sort of teasing things, but you were keeping a lot of stuff in your back pocket. You're keeping a lot of stuff from the audience, like some more hints about what Peridia could have been to like whet our appetites would have been interesting, would have teased us some more. And again, you sort of try to get that goodwill in that last episode with the reveal of the statues of the father, the son, and the daughter, Baylan Skoll going off to the distance to Mount Doom or wherever it is he's going with the flashing red lightning in the distance. Again, you sort of tease that stuff out at the end. But why aren't you building the mythology through the course of these 8 episodes? And I guess that's sort of the frustrating part I have about it. Now Dave Filoni, we know, is the guardian and caretaker of Ahsoka Tano and of these characters from Rebels, and has become the custodian of Grand Admiral Thrawn. Characters that are beloved to so many of us. So many different generations of Star Wars fans. These characters are beloved too. And again, the way that all is I guess the lack of it being sort of teased out in an effective manner. I think back to a New Hope, and when we're at Obi-Wan's hut, and he is giving his father's lightsaber to Luke, or Luke's father's lightsaber to him, I guess would sound more accurate. And he has like that little mini monologue about the dark times, about the Empire, how the Jedi Knights were guardians of peace and justice for 1,000 years, for 1,000 generations, and these are all things that are interesting to us. You're like, oh my gosh, tell me more about this. Tell me more about these clone wars you're talking about. And yeah, we do finally get that payoff. It only took 20 something years to get there, but we finally did. And I guess all I'm asking is be more effective storytellers. I'm on the hook for all these shows. I'm gonna watch them. I'm gonna enjoy them. Again, Ahsoka show is a show that I had many nits to pick, but I still by and large like the show, and I'm still intrigued enough I still love this character and want to see what happens in season 2. And I know not all Star Wars fans feel that way. A lot of Star Wars fans feel burned by the product these days. They don't like the content coming out in the Disney era, and there could be a variety of reasons for that. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole of what makes each individual Star Wars fan tick. We've talked about how Star Wars, in my opinion, can be everything to everyone based on the shows. If the style of the show, the genre of the show, they don't all need to have one tone. They can be existing in different realms of genre. Not everything has to be Andor, but not everything has to be Ahsoka. Not everything. Skeleton Crew is a great example of that as well, of a tonally different kind of Star Wars that does work. I just wish the storytelling was more efficient, more effective. Again, you don't have to spill the beans, but you have to tease it out enough that we're not just left scratching our heads, hoping that we eventually get answers. And again, for a show that I felt was as padded as Ahsoka was, they didn't tease out enough stuff. Not by any stretch. Again, we get to Peridia. We have no idea what Thrawn's been doing there the entire time. Yeah, they look like they've gone through heck. The stormtroopers are all beat up. They're held together with like Night Sister magic and tape and baling wire and bubble gum and all the things. But you have told me nothing. You have hinted at nothing that happened on this planet. Yes, we see some raiders, but they would be no match for Thrawn and his forces. I guess that's where I'm going with this. I'm just frustrated with the lack of not even transparency, but just like, again, tease it. Be storytellers, all right? And foreshadow and hint at things and drop clues. You gave us nothing. And while I initially wanted this podcast to focus on the stuff they didn't give us at the end of Rebels, it all bleeds into Ahsoka because it's a continuation. And in that epilogue at the end of Rebels, kicks off a series of just not getting answers from someone who's supposed to be a quite capable storyteller. And I found it to be frustrating as an audience member. And I don't want to belabor the point much more than I already have, but I'm curious if anyone out there in Buckethead Nation feels the same way. Do you have the same frustrations? Do you have the same nits to pick that I do? Or is it more serious for you? Like, are you like not going to watch Ahsoka now because you're just like, I didn't like the way any of this was handled. I'm done. I'm out of it. I'm over it. I'm curious if that's your reaction as well, because I would have a hard time saying that no, you're making a mistake because they haven't given me anything to make me think that there's going to be any sort of change in the way the story is being told or unfolds in season 2. Now, again, perhaps I'm wrong, and perhaps season 2 of Ahsoka is just revelation after shocking revelation, and it fills in all the blanks and all the gaps that we had coming out of that season 1. But I don't know. Like, what would be the track record that indicates that is where we're going to go next? And I just wanted to put that out there. I wanted to get that off my chest. Again, loved watching Rebels, but I found that epilogue to be a tad frustrating. And then, you look at the way they played around with time dilation in the last couple of episodes of that season, because the same thing with, you go back to the end of season 2, when we see, after the battle with Vader, we see Ahsoka walking down steps of the temple, and we don't go back to that until she leaves the world between worlds, and then we sort of realize that the time dilation is a real thing, that what they showed us hadn't yet happened. It was all, I don't think it was handled well. And again, I guess I just want clarity. I just want clarity on some of these things. Will we get it moving forward, or will Ahsoka season 2 be more of the same? Who's to say? I believe season 2 of Ahsoka is scheduled for later this year. We've yet to get a teaser or any kind of trailer for it, but that could all change here as we get closer and closer to May the 4th, and we get closer and closer to Mandalorian Grogu coming to theaters. We'll just have to wait and see. And that's all I have to say about that, my friends. All right, we're going to get out of here. We're going to be back next week, but not maybe for the reason that you think we're going to be back. Next week, we're dropping a sort of, I don't know, like a Maul-esque episode of the show, but we will not be dropping our review of the first 2 episodes of Maul Shadow Lord. That will be released later in the week due to some commitments that will keep me away from a laptop for a couple days. So bear with me. Next week, like I said, I believe on Monday, we'll do our little Maul reminder episode, freshen your memories on Maul. And then later in the week, we'll get to talk about episodes 1 and 2 of Maul Shadow Lord. All right. But in the meantime, Bucketheads, go out there, be great Star Wars fans, kind, supportive, respectful, understanding, tolerant, and, of course, patient. And we'll be back next week for that Mall of It All episode of MandoVision. I'm your host, our guy Tom, and this is the MandoVision podcast. Make sure you're following us on the socials, Mando_Vision on X and Insta, MandoVision at Blue Sky, and hit me up with an email if you want, MandoVisionTom@gmail.com. Make sure to like, subscribe, follow, and share this show with all the Mandalorians in your covert. If you have time or the inclination, sweet 5-star reviews on all your favorite podcasting platforms are truly, truly appreciated. All right, Bucketheads, again, we'll be back. But remember, this podcast, it can only end one way. This is the way.
This is the way.
This is the way.
This is the way.
I will start my operations here and pull the rebels apart piece by piece. They'll be the architects of their own destruction.
Purple guy, Mando girl, and Ezra Bridger. My, look how you have grown.